Over the weekend, a massive new document leak showed how the global elite hides its wealth and uncovered previously unknown financial connections between some of the world's most powerful people.
Reported business links between a member of the Trump administration and members of Mr. Putin's inner circle.
The leak contained millions of confidential files from a Bermuda-based law firm called Appleby, and it was revealed by the same group of journalists that broke the Panama Papers story last spring. This latest project might be the most expansive work of investigative journalism in history, the product of nearly a year of round-the-clock work by a global network of close to 400 reporters. Vice News was with them as they worked in secret.
What we're doing is systematically going down, looking at Trump, looking at Kushner, looking at all the cabinet appointees, looking for hits.
These extraordinary stories about offshore secrecy, about a sort of political scandal unfolding in real time involving Russia.
Somewhere in those files, there might be the smoking gun.
New at 11, a huge data leak tonight is showing how the world's rich hide their cash.
Million files were leaked from one of the world's most secretive offshore companies.
With the Panama Papers, we had 11.5 million documents.
The biggest financial leak in
banking
history.
bombshell causing shockwaves around the world.
The documents were leaked to the German newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung.
The data came to Süddeutsche Zeitung when a source calling itself John Doe contacted my colleague Bastian, and we pretty soon realized that this is something atomic.
Biggest data leak in history involving world leaders.
The King of Saudi Arabia, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad,
hiding billions of dollars in offshore accounts, all of it reportedly funneled through a law firm in Panama.
We have a new project now. It's codenamed Athena.
The new leak is again in the offshore world. We received data from a big law firm, from Appleby. We can't comment on how we received the documents. We told nobody about that. It's just a small circle of persons here at Süddeutsche Zeitung who know about the nature of the leak, and they are supposed not to talk.
The new leak contains several millions of documents. It's emails, PDFs, Word documents, it's also database files.
Now we have this data and it's not machine readable, so that means we can't search within it. And we had to figure out ways how to make it machine readable.
Part of the problem is that we're dealing with a lot of files which are images and PDFs. There are weeks of work that go into getting everything out of the files, getting data out of the files, getting text out of the files. Somewhere in those files, there might be the smoking gun.
We have already found several heads of state, heads of government, members of the Trump cabinet, several interesting Russians, people very near to President Vladimir Putin. So this new data offers a wide range of interesting stories. We also realized that it's going to be too big for the two of us.
Süddeutsche came to us because we have the technical capabilities to tackle a leak this large. At ICRJ, the mission is to uncover those urgent stories of public interest that go beyond what any particular one journalist or media organization can accomplish on his or her own. We focus on the parallel economy that uses the secrecy of tax havens. Tax havens provide an extreme level of secrecy where you can go and create a company, and it would be impossible for anybody, no matter how powerful a prosecutor can be, to obtain that information. The majority of the people we find are incredibly rich and incredibly powerful. We already have found at this very early stage at least 2 cabinet members from the Trump administration, the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, and also Wilbur Ross, who is the Secretary of Commerce.
If your economic mantra is to put America first, then I think it's fair to be asking why you're doing so much business offshore. People deserve to know.
The ICRJ model is that we coordinate and publish all at the same time. Even if we have someone screaming from the rooftops in a particular country, we hold them back as much as possible and say, no, wait until we all agree. Now that we're sending out the logins, bringing on board hundreds of journalists and giving them access to this really sensitive information, that very much feels like posting an open invite to a house party when your parents are away on Facebook. Like, you know who will come and you trust 90% of them, but you're always wondering, is someone going to slip through the cracks, or will the crazy boyfriend of someone you know come along and just wreck the house?
Could you please all switch off your cell phones for the whole meeting? Because otherwise the electronics will go mad, and due to security reasons, so please switch off your cell phones.
Welcome to Munich and welcome to Süddeutsche Zeitung. The first rule was that we don't talk about what we are doing, that we don't talk to our friends, to our families, to our colleagues. The second was that we share everything that we find out. So let's start today this meeting and this project in this spirit of cooperation, and then I'm sure that we will have a second success. Good luck.
We have emails, we have contracts, we have bank accounts, we have huge databases, and as Appleby is an offshore provider that works in various jurisdictions, they have 10 offices all around the world. Here's just some where they're active. It's Bermuda, Cayman Islands, Guernsey, Jersey, Mauritius, Seychelles, and Isle of Man, my personal favorite.
For me personally, it's kind of amazing because there are a few of us here who have been working on these types of issues for years, you know, really in obscurity. And now to see like a room full of 100 reporters who are all intensely interested in writing about this stuff and digging into it, you know, is pretty amazing.
There's so much in there, I keep getting distracted. You see a name that you recognise, so then you go off down a little trail. But that's why this is really great, because somewhere in this room there might be someone who can actually put that little piece in the jigsaw puzzle for you.
This is my second project working with ICIJ. I was working on the Panama Papers in Iceland, and the Icelandic Prime Minister was linked to an offshore company, and we decided to get his first impressions.
Ég kann ekki einu svona á þetta allt saman, en allt gefið upp til skatts frá upphafi. Ég meina,
he couldn't answer the question, so he walked out of the interview, and a few days later he resigned as a Prime Minister. This is what journalism should be about, to inform the public, so the public can react, and this is good for any democracy.
This is the bit where we actually decide more or less when we're going to publish, so it's very important that you all take part in this. And we all know that in August, it's a dead time to publish in Europe because pretty much everyone takes a break.
It's always bad time in Lebanon. We don't know if we're having elections in the summer. So yes, it's definitely preferable if we do it after September.
Well, so the New York Times votes for the first half of October. That's it.
We would have preferred the beginning of July, because the Germans normally try to be ambitious. The next possible date would be the first half of November.
Can we settle on the 5th? Yeah? Okay, deal.
I'm going to take you to the kind of most secret bunker. I'm not quite sure why we call it the secret bunker, because it's actually on the 4th floor and it's quite a nice view, which you'll see. Hello. Hi. Can I introduce you to Hillary, Nick, Juliet?
We're like a little Leninist cell before the revolution, kind of working in secret.
We're dealing with people's private data here. So in order to protect the people whose data is here in our hands, we work in a locked room, we use passwords, we use encrypted communication and storage.
We're communicating with other journalists all across the globe. I mean, that's why these projects are successful, because everyone swaps information and we share. We have a thing called the iHub, which is like a Facebook for investigative journalists, which you can only access with two-factor authentication.
When we were doing Snowden, all these windows had to be, we didn't have any sunlight, we didn't have any natural light. We were told that intelligence agencies from foreign powers were perched in these flats behind us.
I don't know, you sort of think about investigative journalism, and you think about Woodward and Bernstein, you think about meeting Deep Throat in the car park at 2 in the morning and smoking on a cigarette. I think we've gone from Woodward and Bernstein to geeks looking at vast data sets, searching away until the early hours. It's the age of the leak. This is just an email from Jesse Drucker, who's working for the New York Times. One of the search terms we're looking at appeared in Panama Papers, and there are 3,966 hits. And so we're now supposed to divvy up 1,000 hits between the New York Times, the BBC, the Guardian, and the ICIJ. The New York Times are the new kids on the block. Strangely, that seems. They didn't do Panama Papers, or at least they did. They were a bit like the US in the Second World War. They were a little bit late. We'd done most of the research, and they sort of came in at the end. This time, they're in on the project from the very beginning.
I mean, you've probably noticed most of the documents that I've seen so far have been pretty humdrum legal documents.
It's life at a law firm, right?
Exactly. But it's not like Mossack.
Can you imagine having to draft those documents?
No. It just seems mind-numbing.
So these are the top clients in Cayman, but there are lists there for like in Bermuda and BVI.
The problem is, even if you get a hit, so much of the stuff is so prosaic.
Yeah, but that doesn't matter. The fact that it's prosaic, they never say, oh, you're going to steal money.
No, but...
Is Mike here?
Yeah, he's here.
No.
We don't see ourselves as the opposition. We see ourselves as doing scrutiny of every administration. Donald Trump may choose to, continue to try to cast the New York Times as public enemy number one. Generally speaking, reporters are not personalities who are easily intimidated, nor do they like to be intimidated. So that, I think, just makes people resolute about doing their job and doing it well.
I was taking a look at corporate aircraft, ownership of planes, which I find interesting because you often discover that interesting characters like a lot of Russian oligarchs wind up using the services of companies like Appleby. There's a little bit of a, present under the Christmas tree kind of aspect to mucking around in a database like this and seeing what you can find. We've been looking at the relationships between people associated with the Trump campaign and Russians, and there are a lot of tantalizing leads.
What we're doing is systematically going down, looking at Trump, looking at Kushner, looking at all the cabinet appointees, looking at all the Trump-related entities, looking at all the entities who are related to Trump business partners and things like that, looking for hits.
An ongoing story that I've been looking at is who are Kushner's partners, because a lot of the money behind the Kushner developments or Kushner investments is a mystery. We don't really know who his investors are. Just typing in the last name, you get 400 some odd hits, and you have to sift through every one. I will honestly say that I'm still a little bit of a loss as to how to deal with some of those really kind of gigantic search results.
Right.
Maybe there's some way we can put our heads together and figure out a way to make that work. So, I mean, there's no question that at a certain point, some of the stuff will cohere and you'll come up with a storyline that makes sense, but that hasn't happened so far. Hopefully in a couple of weeks, there'll be more meat on the bone, so.
So this is a program called Linkurious, which is a way of showing relationships between people and companies. In our data, why don't we start with Rex Tillerson? There he is. he has 2 connections. If you click on the Marab Upstream Services Company, all of these connections are shown. All of the directors and shareholders are there. And it's a joint venture for oil and gas exploration in Yemen. These are some of the Yemen state companies, like the Yemen Gas Company. And then these are joint ventures between oil majors and the Yemeni state. He was a director of this company, the Marab Upstream Services Company, from March 1997 to March 1998. Even though it operates in Yemen, it's incorporated in Bermuda, which is not related to any of the companies or the operations, but has 0 corporate tax rate. I actually think we probably have a better story with Wilbur Ross, because with Tillerson, there's just that one connection, which is for a fairly short period of time, and everyone knew he was there. With Ross, there's at least a dozen companies in the data that we see him as a director and shareholder of.
Let's start, first of all, obviously seeing what new documents we may have, but also starting, going outside of the data and connect, just building a very robust file.
This is not an abstract world of corporate structures and numbers. There are real consequences for real people. The main victim is the middle class. They are paying for the infrastructure, they are paying for the schools, they are paying for transportation. And the richest people in our society have found a way to skirt a whole bunch of taxes that the rest of the citizens cannot possibly avoid.
There aren't that many opportunities to really pull back the veil on the business activities of the country's most wealthy people. ICIJ does not have an office in New York City. Their headquarters are in Washington, D.C. So I work in a co-working space. It's a small group of people who generally know each other, mostly reporters. But I can't talk about what I'm doing in their presence, hence why I'm on the roof right now. In my former life as a freelancer, I would talk an awful lot about my work with my friends, my family, and I've all of a sudden gone very quiet, which I think might be a slight relief for them. The story that I'm most excited about, personally, right now, is about a Democrat.
Billionaire investor and founder of Renaissance Technologies hedge fund, James Simon. Thanks a lot for being here.
Well, glad to be here.
James Simons is the founder of Renaissance Technologies, which is probably the world's best performing hedge fund. It uses very complex and secret algorithms to mint billionaires left and right.
They've actually patented a new way of trading really quickly.
James Simons has a trust fund that's sitting out in Bermuda that pretty much nobody knows about. This offshore trust is called the Lord Jim Trust. In 2009, the Lord Jim Trust was worth $7 billion, which is just a staggering sum to be tucked away offshore.
Spencer has just done an incredible job. This is the iHub on Renaissance, and this is all new territory for me. Accounting, and whether a pot of cash is accounted for or not accounted for, But anyway, we have to be very careful because we don't want to be wrong. I'm going to just take a look and see what Bloomberg shows us on the net worth of Simons from Renaissance. So he is the world's 64th richest person with a net worth of $15.7 billion. This Lord Jim Trust is probably worth about $15 or $16 billion now, at least. If Bloomberg or Forbes, Fortune, anybody had ever gotten wind of the existence of this thing, it would have been a huge story. I find it, amazing that a pot of money, $15 $15 billion large. There's absolutely no trace of it in any filing, anything. As appalling as the wealth gap can be in the world, actually it's even more appalling than we think, because there's all these assets offshore, and the impunity that people use this and do this and abuse it is should make your blood boil.
I thought it would be helpful for some of the stories that we were, sort of mutually interested in, to talk a bit about, what our intentions are today.
So it seems like what we clearly have is, Wilbur Ross is a significant shareholder in this company that's making tens of millions of dollars a year as he sits in office as Secretary of Commerce. Wilbur Ross's private equity firm, W.L. Ross & Co., is connected to more than 50 offshore companies in the data. We were able to trace personal investments by Ross through 4 of those companies to a shipping firm called Navigator Holdings. One of the top clients of Navigator is a Russian energy company called Sibur, whose key owners are 2 prominent Russian oligarchs, Leonid Mikhelson and Gennady Timchenko, and Kirill Shamalov, who's Vladimir Putin's son-in-law. Wilbur Ross still has a financial stake in Navigator Holdings. And it adds up when the people who are in charge of commerce and international economics have connections to offshore business dealings. It tells you a lot about the kind of economic advice that Donald Trump is likely to be getting.
The way Sasha has crafted now is like pretty much dead on. Ross does have this fairly interesting, to say the least, relationship with some wealthy Russians who are very well connected in Moscow.
Mm-hmm. I pulled these earnings calls from Navigator Holdings, and the CEO is talking about how they're making all this money because Russia is exporting so much gas to Europe. And they're saying, by the way, and we're making this money in direct competition with U.S. exports.
Jesse, anything you wanted to mention?
I've been working with Spencer on this Yuri Milner story about investments that appear to be bankrolled by either VTB, which is a big Russian bank, or Gazprom Invest Holdings, and sort of raises questions about his connection to the government and what role, if any, the government has in the investments that he's making here in the U.S.
I mean, it seems like if you're doing Milner and the multinational story,
It feels like just doing those 2 feels very challenging to me.
I mean, I think just, keep plugging away at it for the next couple months. There'll be something good. There's kind of a ebb and flow to story ideas. Jesse is also working with Simon Bowers, who's on our team. They've uncovered particular multinational tax avoidance schemes.
I have 10-year-old twin boys and a very small house. They're jumping all over every square inch of that house and driving me crazy. So I've moved out into the yard for some peace and quiet. But of course they follow immediately. They want to know what goes on in the woodshed.
The sweeping narrative is that this offshore law firm caters to all sorts of clients wanting any range of services. One particular type of client is a big multinational who wants to structure their affairs so that more of its profits arrive in low-tax offshore jurisdictions. From a storytelling perspective, we want great amounts of detail, also with a household name attached, because we want to engage with the readers and tell them it's about big companies you've heard of. Facebook is there, Apple is there, Nike is there. I never know what to say, Nike or Nike or sneakers. Do you say sneakers or trainers? I don't know. Do you know what trainers are? people think of Nike as a company, one corporation. In fact, it's a group of companies. It's probably over 100 companies that will include all sorts of strange partnerships. The jewel in the crown of Nike's intellectual property is its swoosh. I mean, it's what everyone knows. The swoosh is owned by someone, right? For many years, it was owned by a company in Bermuda called Nike International Limited. And in 2014, it was switched and is owned by a Dutch partnership that doesn't seem to have a tax residence anywhere in the world. If you're buying a Nike shoe, why should you care whether the intellectual property charge, the bit of the shoe that you paid for that actually has the swoosh on it, whether that money eventually goes to Bermuda or whether it goes to the US? The answer is because let's not pretend otherwise. Tax is about paying for schools, hospitals, roads, police around the world. If your structure is cynically doing that and has no other purpose, that's going to be an uncomfortable conversation for the tax director to have with the corporate reputation director. I don't see this as a crusade, but actually I think the best kind of reporting looks at how it's a systemic issue. A more sober approach to it is to say, we understand why they're doing it, but what are we going to do about it now? And that's what I'm hoping people are going to start asking.
Down to business. Luke, do you want to just give us 5 minutes now?
Yeah, I mean, I just a couple of thoughts. One, I was kind of reviewing the Twitter stuff. It is very good. I think it's almost the best story. Genuinely is Russian state funds which are used to buy a big stake in Twitter. We have money from VTB, which is a Russian state bank. It's basically the Kremlin, going into a Russian American called Yuri Milner. And then we have Yuri Milner investing in Jared Kushner. Jared Kushner is an interesting story in the data. Jared is kind of right up there, and potentially he could be our best story. But at the moment, we can't prove that it's Russian state money going to Kushner because the money may be going somewhere else. And none of this is easy. It's not like kind of Vladimir gives money to Yuri, gives money to Jared. It's a puzzle. We have a political story which is as big as any story I've ever come across, involving Donald Trump and the Russians and Trump's associates. But if you're an American reporter and you annoy power, you annoy the White House, what's going to happen? Donald Trump's going to tweet at you. Whereas in Russia, everybody understands what can happen to journalists who criticize power, and in particular who expose corruption.
Every day, my day is different. I don't wake up at the same time and I don't get out of my home at the same time. I usually take different routes. So one day I come to my office with car, another day I come with metro. The day after tomorrow I took a metro, then a bus, and then I walk. In 2 days I take a car to another metro station. I have like hundreds of routes. If powerful people want to kill you, they will kill you, and there is nothing you can do. The only thing you can is to try to become a difficult target. If you turn your head, you will see 6 portraits of our reporters from Novaya Gazeta who were killed. Yuri Shikachykin, he is considered to be the father of investigative reporting in Russia. He did stories about secret services and about the corruption within the secret services, and he was poisoned. Fair journalism in Russia is still, for my regret, not very safe profession.
Слушай, а сенатор — это твоя поляна?
Так, а что там? Да.
Ты видела этого Глеба Фетисова?
Он сенатором был до 9.
Он давно очень был, да.
До 9, с 3 или 4 по 9.
Потом
Потом был членом общественной палаты, и сейчас тоже, по-моему.
Когда он разорился.
Его стали сажать.
Вот. Окей, просто сам факт компании
да.
Это так себе, конечно. Не очень большая новость. sometimes we see names and even interesting names, but we don't have any information about companies. So basically, it's just the fact that somebody owned a company and nothing else, and it's a problem.
You see all these Sibur and Wilbur-Ross connections. It's not a Russian problem. It's not the biggest Russian problem, I should say.
That Kirill Shamalov, the son-in-law of Vladimir Putin, is doing business with Ross, who is now the secretary of whatever in the US, means nothing.
Unfortunately, the scale of problems in Russia is so big that we are focused mostly on the state.
Ты хочешь коньяка?
Давай. Вот тут как раз чуть-чуть есть что доработать, да? А у тебя есть какая-то вот история, которая может претендовать на якорную?
Блин, с якорными историями у нас почти... Ну, в смысле, у нас ее нет.
У нас нет.
Ну, прямо скажем, да.
И чтобы у нас был месяц на написание историй.
Ну, то есть, вот, допустим, мы даже это придумаем в конце сентября.
Да.
Все же может измениться. Это будут только накиданные идеи. Надо больше времени, чтобы их продумать.
Слушай, нам с Панамой хватило, блядь, месяца, а здесь историй меньше, поэтому... Вообще, честно говоря, настолько мне жалко уебывать свое время на это.
Ну, что делать, раз уж мы...
My colleagues in Western Europe and in the US, for them, any business with a sanctioned person is bad. And it's okay. I live in a country which is sanctioned, right? And that is why our point of view is different.
I think there's an understanding that there are Russian oligarchs out there who have investments outside of Russia, but who are basically wealthy or who are billionaires, essentially at the pleasure of Vladimir Putin. And what this story shows is that to some degree, Yuri Milner is in that camp too. Yuri Milner, who's a big Silicon Valley investor, made big investments in Twitter and Facebook, and those investments were bankrolled by the Russian state. There are very interesting and significant memos from Appleby that lay out some of the relationships between VTB, which is the big state-owned Russian bank, and one of the investment vehicles that Yuri Milner used. DST is the name of Milner's venture capital firm. DST invests about $380 million in Twitter. About half of that came from VTB, the big state-owned Russian bank. The connection between the Russian state and Facebook is a little more complicated. Yuri Milner's firm invested in Facebook through a number of different vehicles. One of those vehicles was owned by a British Virgin Islands firm called Canton. Canton was getting tons of funding from Gazprom Invest Holdings, the state-owned financial institution. And Canton has numerous connections to an Uzbek-Russian oligarch named Alisher Usmanov, who is a huge investor for Yuri Milner and has been for years. Yuri Milner has since sold his stakes in those companies, but it sort of illustrates the kind of long arm of the Kremlin extending into Silicon Valley in a way that none of us knew before. Yuri Milner is also an investor in a real estate technology company called Cadre. Cadre is a company that was founded and remains part owned by Jared Kushner. The bottom line is Jared Kushner has an investor in his firm who has significant financial ties to the Kremlin that none of us knew about before. Now we know.
So I've made the trip down here from New York to meet with Sasha and put the finishing touches on the Wilbur-Ross story. He's been great to collaborate with. He's a damn good researcher, and he discovered the Navigator-Seaboard relationship to begin with.
The main thing is, can we call it Ross's private equity firm now that he's resigned and is Commerce Secretary?
Yeah, I think the context is clear, because we say later that he just this year stepped aside from the firm, but it's a fact that it's long been the majority shareholder.
his company, the W.L. Ross Group, was the leading shareholder, and he still has a stake in Navigator Holdings. And that actually raises some important questions about his duties as Commerce Secretary. If he does anything that has a direct and predictable effect on his own financial interests, that is a conflict of interest. He knows that he has these holdings. It seems likely that he was not expecting it to become a public issue, especially since it never came up during his confirmation process.
He disclosed the fact that he has an underlying investment in Navigator in his ethics disclosures, but this is, a couple of lines on a 57-page document that I think apparently went overlooked.
You never know what the response is going to be until the story comes out. But what I do think is important about this story is that it shows a business relationship between a cabinet member in the Trump administration and Putin's son-in-law. It is another example, the highest ranking example, of a Trump administration official who's making money through business connections to Russia.
So I guess the thing now is to, as we talked about earlier, is just trying to reach out to the people left, like Ross, Navigator, Seymour. I think a lot of people are going to be very unhappy with Appleby. I mean, if you can just picture what kind of, response they're going to get from clients, that they have to tell them that, all of their records have been in the hands of a consortium of investigative reporters for the past year.
The main point of the visit to Bermuda is really the visit to Appleby's offices. Bermuda is the beating heart of Appleby and its global operations.
What more do you need? Palm trees, blue sea. Yeah, I think this qualifies as paradise.
It will take words from the screen that I've now been reading for 12 months or so and will give those people and those buildings a life. The Australians, the Danish, and then the Japanese also came on board. Tomorrow I will have in hand a printed copy of the questions to Appleby so that the person asking the questions can hand that over if they're invited to. It's now been well over a week, more like 10 days I would say, since ICIJ first contacted Appleby with a list of questions, and I think at that point they would have certainly become aware that there'd been a leak of their information and that journalists were trawling over it. We're still waiting to hear substantive responses to any of those questions, so the Tuesday visit really is an effort to get some kind of response. The cat is well and truly out of the bag as soon as we go to their front door. All right, here we are.
Morning, ma'am. We're with the International Consortium for Investigative Journalists. I'll give you those two. That's me and my colleague. Thanks very much.
Morning, Appleby.
I feel like I've read these boardroom names.
You're having a case of deja vu.
I am. I'm thinking, oh, the Cedar Room. That's where that interview happened.
Sir, you're on the way.
Okay, thanks very much.
Please have a seat.
I hope they're thinking, who is the best placed person who can answer ICIJ's legitimate questions? I don't know if that's actually what's happening. But we've certainly been sitting here a lot longer than we thought we would.
So unfortunately, there's no one here to talk to you right now. Thank you for your business cards. What I will do is have them reach out via email, someone who can speak with you. There's no one here at this time.
Great. And if you like, we'll leave this with you. I suspect you've got a copy of this.
I don't know what that is, so I can't take that.
Okay, it's just a copy of the letter we sent to Appleby.
Okay, well then they should have it then.
Okay, fair enough.
All right.
Thanks very much indeed. And
Thank
sorry for any inconvenience.
No worries. Thank you.
I feel pleased that we were able to get inside, have a pleasant interaction, let them know that our that we're here if they're available to speak to us, and I look forward to receiving answers to their questions. This is an industry that not only us, but many people across the world have said is broken and is facilitating growing inequality and injustice. If I were Appleby, I would have reasons to be worried about what's about to come out.
Now the cat's out of the bag, if you will. I mean, the Appleby knows what's going on, and now we're sending these, requests for comment letters out to the Russian oligarchs who control Seaboard, and Sasha's contacting Navigator. And we'll also be sending some comment letters to a couple of other Trump administration officials.
We've thought about it, how we approach these guys, right? And so we don't want to alarm them, and because there's a fear that they would preempt us.
We're going to try to reach Wilbur Ross, and normally that's kind of an easy thing to do, to reach out to the media person for a cabinet official, but we have Director of Public Affairs vacant, which doesn't inspire confidence, and the press secretary's position is also vacant.
Office of Public Affairs.
Yeah, hi, this is Mike McIntyre at the New York Times. I was trying to send an email, make sure it gets to Secretary Ross involving his personal investments, so it's kind of important.
I can give you an email address. Just let me know when you're ready.
Hi, Mr. Gasshalter. My name is Mike Forsyth. I am a reporter with the New York Times, and I'm working on a story about James Simons. It's a story about offshore trusts, and so hope to hear from you sometime today in the afternoon if you've got a few seconds to talk to me. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Okay. We finally cleared the hurdle of figuring out who to even send it to.
Yeah, now the suspense begins.
We're almost there. We're hours away from pushing the button. It's been quite a long investigation. A year is a long stretch of time for a journalist when you're used to the kind of daily churn and flow of news. We're now migrating downstairs to the second floor, where we'll sit with sub-editors, with the duty editor, and we'll be checking the stories to make sure that everything's absolutely kind of accurate. There hasn't been intimidation, but we have had a lot of legal threats. Yuri Milner flew from California to London, and we met him. We had quite a civilized chat, I thought. He flew home, and while he was on his plane, we got a very, let's say, a less than friendly legal letter from his lawyers. There was investment from the Russian state into Twitter. Twitter didn't know about it. Milner says it was purely commercial. Russian spies, I think we can say that, used Facebook and Twitter to subvert the 2016 US presidential election. Now, there's no suggestion that Yuri Milner was involved in any of that. That's not true. But I think what it does show, in my view, is that there was certainly an interest. It may just have been a commercial interest from fairly powerful forces in Moscow to get into the tech game early on. And this wasn't known until we got this leak, and I think it should be known.
The investigation is really over. We're in the home stretch looking at the presentation issues, the page design and the digital design.
We have Kirill Shamalov, who's Putin's son-in-law, and over here is Landon Mikkelsen. He's an oligarch. They both are taking Putin on a tour of a Seaboard facility. Oh. Seaboard is the Russian company that does business with Ross's firm.
So how long is the story?
This goes over to a third page. There was so much sensitivity with that story that we just couldn't make it fit on 2 pages.
We're just tweaking the language a little bit to kind of hedge against the possibility, however remote, that he can say that he somehow divested some of it since then. One word that you can't back up, or one thing that strays into hyperbole, or some assertion that you can't support, that can undermine the whole thing.
This is just like kind of the inevitable little last minute things that have to be checked and fixed and comments. Yuri Milner came in here for a pretty lengthy interview where he gave kind of an interesting presentation. He came into the office with a series of clear plastic cups that he laid out on a table. One was marked Facebook, one was marked alleged Russian government funds, one I think was marked Usmanov, and he pulled out a large bag of green M&Ms and then poured the M&Ms from one cup to the next to kind of demonstrate how you can't really show that this dollar from this entity ended up in this investment. The point that he was making, I think, cuts in two different directions. You could argue that, in fact, it's all just one big pot of money, and of course the state money is there.
We're just wrapping a bow, on all our stories. Simons did get back to us, and what he told us is that his portion of the Lord Jim Trust had, a few years ago, been transferred to a charitable foundation in Bermuda. So an offshore trust became an offshore charity. There's no website for this charity. There was, as far as we know, no press release announcing the formation of what is one of the world's largest foundations. Just popped up in Bermuda. And now we're going to tell the world about it.
Trump is in Asia. We're hoping that North Korea doesn't launch any missiles in the next few hours, largely for global security, but also for the sake of our project. Now we're about to see what it all amounts to. I think it's going to get some attention.
Sasha,
hey, Marina.
I like your fashion.
Thank you.
Okay, we're all good. Hamish? Yeah.
Too late to pull back now?
Yeah.
That's it.
Good
Wow,
timing.
people already explaining to us.
4:59.
In a major leak, we're learning how the world's wealthiest are reportedly hiding their fortunes in offshore accounts.
13 million documents, mostly from an offshore law firm called Appleby. They are known as the Paradise Papers.
Another top Trump administration official is now under scrutiny for his relations with Russia.
Ross continued to control a major stake in a shipping company.
The documents reveal evidence of a Russian stake in the ownership of Facebook and Twitter. This leak is going to be making news for a while.
This cache of material from this one law firm is just that. It's the records of one law firm. There are hundreds of firms that do this type of work.
The documents give us a glimpse of where the world's financial elite stash their cash.
The big conclusion for me is that only suckers pay tax. Rich people don't pay tax. Big corporations don't pay tax. It just means the rest of us have to pay tax, and we have to pay more tax.
We live in a gilded age. I mean, boy, do we live in a gilded age. And this is a ground zero for that.
It is across the front page, above the fold of just about every newspaper there is this morning.
In each country, you have victims of the offshore world. If we can build that hospital or this school with public money, then the reason is they decided that they don't want to pay taxes like everybody else does.
The Paradise Papers, released by international news outlets, also point to Nike and the Queen of England.
These are secrets that are of immense public interest. We have held them accountable to account, and now it's up to citizens and democratic institutions to take the next step.
The Department of Commerce should investigate. If he fails to provide a convincing and compelling explanation, he ought to resign.
When you're able to take the lid off the garbage can and actually see what's crawling around in there, you find lots of things that may be legal, but it makes you wonder, how can they not be illegal?